The Baha project.
Before the courts today for that recent drug bust in Andros. The details coming up in the Bahamas tonight.
And coming up in sports, the Peace on the Streets basketball tournament underway. The Bahamas tonight, the National Report starts now.
Now in HD. ZNS Network presents The Bahamas Tonight. This portion of the news brought to you by BTC Every Day.
The government moving to liquidation following failed talks in China. I'm Altaviz Mannings. Thanks so much for joining us. This latest decision announced by Prime Minister the Right Honorable Perry Christie in a national address last night is the government's best resolution to ensuring the multi-billion-dollar resort is completed and opened. Prime Minister Christie is adamant that there should and must be a Bahamian solution to the matter and will be seeking for the Supreme Court's approval on its latest move. Now, Mr. Christie is building a timeline of how the parties arrived to this point, detailing conversations and moves by all parties. The Prime Minister says getting the resort opened soon is still the single biggest priority, and the process of seeing this investment opened is a matter of national sovereignty. We get more on our top story tonight from Clint Watson.
With the $3.5 billion mega Bahama resort 97% complete, the government is moving to bring the Bahama development under the control and supervision of the Bahamian Supreme Court, with the Attorney General on Thursday filing a winding-up petition against the 14 Bahamian entities that filed for Chapter 11 protection in the United States at the end of June.
These compulsory or involuntary winding-up proceedings are designed to work in very similar terms as Chapter 11, but with the stark difference that they will be controlled by a provisional liquidator under the supervision of the Bahamian courts rather than being controlled by Mr. Ismailian. The role of the liquidators will be to expedite the resolution of the matter and to prepare a plan for the restructuring of Bahama that will result in the earliest possible completion and opening of the project.
Prime Minister the Right Honorable Perry Christie says the actions taken by the Attorney General are not designed to punish nor destroy Bahama. Rather, he says the solution will recognize and respect the rights and legitimate interests of the key parties, including Bahama and the Bahamian people. The nation's leader also disclosing the details that led to those failed talks in China to reach an agreement.
It transpired at the Beijing negotiations that Bahama's additional funding requirements had increased considerably and now included not only funding for completion of construction, but funding to meet startup and operating expenses, funding to cover other liabilities, and deferral of principal and the initial balloon payments under the loan facility with Exim Bank.
The Prime Minister said notwithstanding the bank and construction companies' willingness to be flexible with the new development, Bahama still stenched.
Bahama still wanted an extended period for further negotiations, which was not acceptable. Bahama was also not prepared to agree to terms which would have included the immediate discontinuance of their Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings in the United States.
Mr. Christie says he is convinced that they're on the right path.
One that will lead to the completion and opening of Bahama in the near future. While it is true that there are still major obstacles to be overcome, I remain extremely optimistic about the end result, one that will not only ensure that employment of thousands of Bahamians, but the emergence as well of a resort destined for great success.
The government has arranged for a second payment of salaries of Bahamas Bahamian employees with a view to such payments being recovered in due course so as not to place any additional strain on the Bahamian taxpayer. Clint Watson, ZNS Network News.
Bahama officials releasing a statement saying government's wind-up petition puts the resort's staff and assets at severe risk and significantly jeopardizes the future of the Bahamian Riviera. Government's move comes after failed talks on the way forward for the multi-billion-dollar project. Bahama is saying that many of the statements of the Prime Minister are just plain misleading, namely, A, there was no agreement in June, as the Prime Minister said. There was not finalized understanding discussed by Bahama and the Export-Import Bank of China, to which China State Construction and CCA had not agreed. Indeed, there was no construction timeline or cost to complete from the general contractor or terms received from the lender. B, Bahama has not refused to dismiss the Chapter 11. They have agreed to dismiss the case as soon as parties have a mutually beneficial binding agreement to the benefit of all parties, an interest the government should share rather than taking actions that risk irreparably damaging the discussions. C, even so, Bahama's statement goes on to say the Chapter 11 is not an attack on the sovereignty of the country in any manner. The application for the recognizing orders was not intended to enjoin any action by the government. D, the project was on budget, even with a 4-month delay had it opened on March 27th, the date that China State Construction repeatedly promised the developer and the Prime Minister, including during his visit to Beijing in January. The project continued to survive past that date, and employees were paid in no small part due to contributions of more than $18 million by the Ismailian family. The Ismailian family has invested over $900 million in the project, has repeatedly announced its willingness to invest millions more, as recently as offering $80 million to Bahamar last week. However, Bahamar senior officials claim they are continuing with discussions with general contractor and the lender in good faith. Well, late this evening, government released a statement hitting back. Our Clint Watson just returning from Miami covering the Prime Minister, and he joins us live with those details. Hi, Clint.
Good evening, Alton. This statement, of course, is coming in from Prime Minister Christie moments ago in response to what you just read there from Bahama. The Prime Minister says he dismissed an absolute nonsense, those comments read by Bahama. Bahama suggested that the government's initiation of winding up proceedings amounts to a seizure of private assets. Now, continuing, the Prime Minister said that it was disappointing that the principals of Bahama would not only utter such untruths, but that they would do so in a way transparently calculated to damage the economic interests of the Bahamas. The Prime Minister continued by saying that the nationalization of private property is not only unconstitutional, but it is completely repugnant to his personal political philosophy and ethos of governance and that of his government. He's therefore rejected in the strongest possible terms any suggestion to the contrary. Now, also addressing the matter was the Attorney General, the Honorable Allison Maynard Gibson QC. And she said that it is unfortunate that Bahama has mischaracterized the winding up proceedings in the way that it has. Quote, she says, if appointed by the court, a provisional liquidator would be wholly independent and would be subject to the control and oversight not of the government but of the Bahamas Supreme Court. Moreover, the Attorney General continued, there is no truth whatsoever in the suggestion that this is an attempt by the government to nationalize Bahama's private assets, something that is not only constitutionally unlawful, but completely contrary to the policies of successive governments of the Bahamas. That, she says, is most certainly not the purpose nor the effect of any order that might be made for provisional winding up of anything in the Bahamas. Now, the Prime Minister also repudiated as egregiously insulting and verifiably false Bahama's statement that he had misled the Bahamian people in his national address last night. In fact, he said, quote, my version of events as related in my address is supported in every material, particularly by China Exim Bank. In particular, he noted, China Exim Bank has expressed its disappointment to him today over Bahama's lack of flexibility in this matter and their unwillingness to accept the sensible solutions offered to them in Beijing. So there we have Prime Minister Christie's response to this. And again, we emphasize he is basing all of this information here, particularly with those talks. And of course, the China Exim Bank, who themselves, he said, expressed around their table their disappointment that Bahamar is not coming to the table and negotiating in good faith. Live in the newsroom, I'm Clint Watson. Back to you, Altavis.
Thanks a lot, Clint. Where the Bahamar bankruptcy saga is a story everyone is talking about, including head of the Chamber of Commerce and Employers Confederation, Edison Sumner. He told us about the latest developments in the Bahamar saga and what this could mean for the country's economy. He talked to our Janelle Ferguson this morning.
A possible downgrade by credit agencies is still on the table for the Bahamas if the Bahamar issue is not resolved soon. This according to CEO of the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employers Confederation, Edison Sumner, who was in talks with rating agency officials.
We met just last night with Standard & Poor's to talk about their outlook for the Bahamas and the fact that if this Bahamar doesn't come off the ground within a certain period of time, that there's a greater than 50% chance that they are going to downgrade the Bahamas sovereign ratings by maybe 2 points. I mean, that is unconscionable. So whatever we have to do to cause that not to happen is what has to be done now. And that means having to put in effort by the government to try and secure this deal properly.
That's why Sumner says the decision to move the Bahamar development into liquidation is being viewed as not necessarily the best course of action, but the best option available to the government.
This is what we may think is being sort of a worst case scenario. And we're hoping that as they go through the process of going before the magistrate, or the Supreme Court, and having their matters heard, that they'll have some way to find some common ground to come to some settlement very soon.
Prime Minister Perry Christie also announced that the government has agreed for a second payment of salary for employees of Bahamar with hopes of recovering those funds. Sumner says chamber members expressed their concern during the first round of payout and their position has not changed.
It's a slippery road. It's really a road that's built on eggshells, so you got to be careful how we get around that, because we don't want to see the government put itself in a situation where they're obligating themselves to cover someone else's responsibility, right? But we do understand the social implications of that. And we're optimistic still that those persons who find themselves really on the periphery at the moment may not be there for long, and that perhaps in the next couple of weeks, or next few weeks, I should say, that we will see them back on the job full time.
Now, the executive of the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce says, as the Bahamas looks at future developments, we must not put all of our eggs into one basket, as it has the potential to cripple the economy. Janelle Ferguson, ZNS Network News.
Well, we can also tell you this Friday that all is not sitting well with one of the largest unions in the country and the Melia Nassau Beach Resort in Cable Beach. The Bahamas Hotel Catering and Allied Workers Union is reportedly appealing a court decision on gratuity payments to employees at that resort. The court ruled that gratuity payments were not contractually payable on all-inclusive packages without an agreement on the gratuity rate and distribution formula. It was also ruled that the hotel was not obligated to pay gratuities for all-inclusive guests to the line staff. The gratuities have reportedly been in escrow for the past 7 months. Meantime, the union is expressing its concern over the ruling, which it says will severely impact the take-home pay for employees.
2 years, this home is now history. Hear from the owner coming up in the Bahamas tonight.
This portion of the news is brought to you by the new Shell and Letty, designed for extra miles.